that's the end of the segment that I'm going to play on her, and I'm just going to get to my conclusions and the points that I think are really important to pay attention to that I haven't necessarily seen anyone else in the men's community say. The first point, and this is more of a political point than anything else, Shoe0nHead is an anti-SJW leftist. And that's really kind of an interesting belief system or ideology to have at this point, because you really are walking a tightrope. And frankly, I've thought about this for a few years now, and I just don't think that sort of viewpoint, where you fit on the political spectrum, I don't think that's going to be sustainable for much longer. I think that those that identify as center-left or leftist libertarians, they are either going to have to move away from the left at some point and identify just as centrists or libertarians in general or classical liberals that are no longer associated with the left at all, or they're going to be consumed by the SJW leftist ideology. Because the amount of power and influence that the radical left has over the mainstream left is so complete at this point that it is extremely difficult to walk that tightrope. And for myself, I kind of see myself as a center-right libertarian-leaning person. And so I kind of get it because I don't identify as conservative. I'm not a conservative anymore. I used to be sort of a blue pill traditional conservative type years ago, but I've woken up and realized that sort of way of viewing the world is just not congruent with how the world actually operates. So I do get, hey, I'm on the right, but I'm not really conservative, and Shoe is on the left, but she's not really an SJW. But I have a lot more room to work with because the right is so fractured, I think. So I'm fairly comfortable saying I'm kind of a libertarian-leaning, center-right-ish person. I don't see how you can do that on the left now, given how completely domineering the radical left has become. The SJW way of thinking, wokeism, has become on the left. The entire Democratic Party platform these days, for example, is you need to believe that you're a victim or an oppressor based on your race, based on your gender, based on your sexual orientation, your religion, and so forth. And so to distance yourself from that and not move toward the right, I don't think that is a sustainable thing to do. And so I question whether Shoe0nHead is going to continue to hold that political position or belief system, if you want to call it that, over time, because honestly, I just don't see it, right? I don't see how you can walk that tightrope. I think she's eventually probably going to just start calling herself a centrist, or she's going to be basically like every other leftist out there. And just to wrap up this point, I saw her interview that she did on some sort of left-leaning news outlet, and some of the stuff that they talked about, like past history of oppression of a certain group versus white men not having that history of oppression. Man, that's really close to being an SJW. That's really close to believing in the exact same stuff. I get that you can then say, well, I reject this approach of the whole I'm a victim because of race and gender and whatnot, but you're damn close to already being an SJW if you have that point of view. It's interesting because so much of Shoe's content is on this anti-SJW sort of trek or having that mindset. But then at the same time, since she's left-leaning and basically says that she's a left libertarian, she kind of believes in some pretty similar stuff. It's just that her conclusions are slightly different. So I don't know where she's going to go with that. There are others like Sargon of Akkad that kind of are in a similar position from what I remember. I think that kind of describes his political views to a degree as well. But it's just interesting to see where these people will go, because I don't think they can maintain being a leftist that's not an SJW. I think that the left is so subsumed by SJWism and wokeism that if it doesn't die down soon, these kinds of people are going to either have to move to the right and just call themselves centrists, or they're just going to be basically a different flavor of SJW. that point is neither here nor there when it comes to the overall topic of this video, so I'm going to move on. One thing that has crossed my mind about Shoe0nHead in this sort of video is comparing her to someone like Lauren Southern in the past. And there are many similarities and many differences, but it's interesting to kind of use a case study to see where this might go in terms of June being someone that speaks out against feminism and someone that speaks out or attempts to speak out in favor of helping men, is that Lauren Southern was kind of in this same boat several years ago when I first started being a participant within the men's community. And she was anti-feminist, right? She would talk about how men have issues too and all that kind of stuff, which to me is not the correct starting point, but nonetheless, she was a critic of feminism. And it's only recently that things kind of came full circle, where she's basically, from what I gather, and this is going to be kind of harsh, but I'm going to say it anyway, she learned all the wrong lessons from her divorce. She has this sort of men are bad within the men's community, and there's so much hatred toward women, and your MGTOW guys or your Manosphere participants are just as bad as the feminists and all that kind of stuff. And it's interesting to see that development because it really didn't surprise me. It was kind of disappointing. I hope that Lauren would sort of cultivate being against feminism into actually understanding men's issues better, but she did the exact opposite of that, right? It's, oh, boo-hoo, men won't do the things that they're supposed to do in marriages. Men won't do the things that they're supposed to do in society. We need to get men to shape up, and these Manosphere content creators are getting them to do all the wrong things instead. That's what I gather from a lot of her vitriol lately. Lauren Southern is kind of a dipshit when it comes to learning these lessons, evidently. And again, I know that's harsh. I don't really intend to use a bunch of sort of insults here. It's just, compare that to where Shoe0nHead is. Shoe0nHead is not a traditional conservative, but at the same time, she's not really pro-MRA. And that's the main similarity that I see here, is that neither Lauren Southern nor June now, or even in the past, have really said, I identify as a men's rights advocate. I want to help men. I want that large part of what I do on YouTube and in the online community to be about helping men's problems. You can discuss the sort of legitimacy or not of that, but I do think you see examples of women that have done that haven't done it for likes and clicks, like Karen Strawn, Janice Fiamingo, Diana Davidson. Some of those women don't make content regularly anymore, but I do think that they were actual MRAs. Whether you agree with everything that they said and did or not, they were, at least from their point of view, advocating for men's issues. Lauren Southern never did that. The most that Lauren Southern basically did was tangentially associate herself with the men's community. And I think that's interesting because a lot of guys today will say, oh, Lauren Southern was always a chameleon and always pretended to be something she wasn't. Or I can't, understand why she's decided to turn against men and all that. I don't see so much of that, but that there are a lot of guys that think that way, because I remember how many people were saying, oh, more women need to be like Lauren back in the day when she was making anti-feminist content. But she was never an MRA. She was never someone that actually gave a crap or even made a statement that she gave a crap about men. Lauren Southern was anti-feminist pretty much exclusively because she is a traditionalist. She is a traditional conservative. Lauren Southern just wants men to go back to being providers and protectors. And that ended up coming full circle, right? We can see now that that was always the case, but it was never really about Lauren pretending to be anything. It's just that men didn't want to see what she was. They didn't want to realize that, no, she's not really being a chameleon. She's just not really saying anything that helps men. She's just criticizing feminism. Now, contrast that with someone like Shoe0nHead. This is interesting to me because she is not a traditional conservative at all, right? She identifies as a leftist, as I've already gone into detail in mentioning. And that's different, but at the same time, she's saying some of the same things, right? She's saying that men within the men's community are acting like feminists. She's saying that a lot of the guys that are making these comments or replies are like the SJWs. Okay, that's not a good sign, but at least she's not going to have the approach of men need to be providers and protectors necessarily, because she's not as ideologically inclined to do that, right? If we're being optimistic, maybe she won't do that. But the point is that essentially someone like Lauren Southern is potentially the future of Shoe0nHead minus the traditionalism. More of a leftist point of view, especially if she does what I've mentioned before. She falls off that sort of ideological tightrope of being a leftist but being anti-SJW, right? I could easily see that happening, guys. And this is getting into the sort of core of what I want to convey here, finally, in this video, is that don't be surprised if someone like Shoe0nHead comes out and says, MGTOW are just the opposite side of the coin as the feminists, or the men's community isn't about helping men. You need to listen to me and what some of the other content creators that are female have to say, right? Don't be surprised if she fails to take this to a healthy place where she's just saying, you know what, I actually am concerned about men and I want to help them, because she is definitely not a Janice Fiamingo. She is not a Diana Davidson or a Karen Strawn. She is not an MRA. She is not really talking about helping men per se. This just happened to be the topic of the video that she's making, along with her history of criticizing feminism. But so what? Criticizing feminism doesn't mean much of anything. Not only do I doubt that she'd criticize first and second wave feminism, especially as someone that's left-leaning, meaning she probably feels like women should have the right to vote based on basically just existing as citizens, and women's right to abortion of convenience. Most likely she's pro-choice. I don't know that for sure. Even in a society where men have no right to paternal surrender, she probably supports first and second wave feminism. But even if you want to basically put that to the side, she is not actually advocating for men's issues. She's not talking about no-fault divorce. She's not talking about the Duluth model. She's not talking about reversing Me Too. She's not talking about one-sided gender roles and expectations. She may be mentioning things like hypergamy, right? She may be making correct observations in many cases in her criticism of feminism, but she's not actually saying anything that helps men here. And so the point that I want to make more than anything is to take everything that these women say with a grain of salt and to keep your expectations low. They're not all chameleons, in my opinion. They're not, generally speaking, trying to help men either. As Stardust and others have said, they don't know what it's like to be a man, let alone do they really want to help men deal with the situations that they face. So it's not even a question of, do they really care about men? Probably not. Maybe at best, they care about some of the men in their own lives. Maybe. But many of them don't. Many of them are just trying to get likes and clicks. And it's funny that she says, the solution is to give me money, when really the solution is to just walk away from this whole mess if you're looking at this from the individual man's perspective. The solution is to not be entangled in a marriage or get involved in terms of living with a woman or having a baby with her. That's really the solution at the individual level. And that's the only place where there is a solution. But, you've got to keep your expectations low. If you're going to watch content like this at all, if you're interested at all in what some of the anti-feminist women have to say, especially the ones that aren't really MRAs at all, you've got to realize that most of them really don't care about men. And this is all just my opinion, of course, that many of them don't understand what's really going on between themselves and men. And most of them have their own personal motivations. Basically, all of them have their own personal motivations, right? Lauren Southern's motivation was that she was a traditional conservative. She didn't like feminism because she wants men to be the providers and protectors individually. That is the essence of how traditional conservatives view men, unfortunately. With someone who is more left-leaning like June, it's interesting because it's a little bit different in the way that it manifests itself, but ultimately it's pretty similar. It's, oh, you're still just like the SJWs if you're a man that basically points out a lot of these facts, or if you basically argue with me, I'm just going to block you, right? That's not a good sign. But the overall point, guys, again, keep your expectations low and take all of this with a grain of salt, because the exceptions to the women that are just basically interested in either getting likes and clicks, making money, or just getting attention of some sort, the exceptions will prove themselves over time, like some of the women that I've just mentioned. And it's interesting that June mentions the honey badgers, because a lot of them have been with it for a long time, and they actually are MRAs. Some of them I like, some of them I don't care for. Karen Strawn being one of the ones that I tend to like, but they're the ones that have kind of shown that they're actually serious about it. All these other women, you can pretty much safely assume, are not serious about helping men. If they are, then they're going to show that over time, but the opportunity that they have to just sort of build their own channel or get men to basically be interested in what they have to say and make money off of it or get attention, that is almost certainly the bigger reason why women are motivated to make anti-feminist content. And again, I think it's important to say that they're not necessarily chameleons if they don't come out as MRAs in the first place. They're not even pretending to really care about men. They're just saying that they're against feminism because they're traditionalists, or because they're against SJWism, or because in some cases they may believe that they're egalitarians, but that still doesn't really say, oh, we're going to help men now necessarily. It could, but in many cases it doesn't really lead to that conclusion. So that's sort of the overall points that I wanted to make with this, is to say, I don't have high expectations here. I think June may be somewhat more intelligent and perceptive than someone like Lauren Southern. I think that she's smarter than Lauren, probably. But at the same time, this is someone that supported Bernie Sanders, right? This is someone that really walks a thin line politically. And I do think that's relevant to looking at how she sees gender relations, how she sees men and women, is if you take someone that's really on the fringe of being an SJW, if you're being honest, no matter how much you want to say that you're not an SJW, I get it. I get that you can hold that position. I'm not saying that she is, but it does seem like that she believes in things like past history of oppression affecting policies now and stuff like that, which is not in itself illegitimate across the board, especially if you want to look at things like race. I don't believe that there is any past history of oppression between men and women. I think men and women just had different roles that they played within society, and men in the past had most of the responsibility, so they had most of the authority over the families and the communities as well. Now, men have most of the responsibility, or nearly all of it, and none of the authority. And TFM and others have talked about that a great deal. But ultimately, the problem that you're going to have is that these types of content creators are not really pro men's rights in the first place. And yet, so many people want to say, well, I think June makes good points. I think she may actually care about men. And she says, I have empathy for men. Does she? Probably not. Probably not, because of just the lack of similar experiences. It's hard to empathize with something you haven't experienced. But also because she's just basically doing this for her job, right? I'm not going to go as far as to say that she's purely a grifter or that she's lying or being deliberately deceitful. I don't think I need to do that. The overall point is that it wouldn't surprise me at all. And you could call this a prediction if you want. I don't necessarily know this will happen, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if, just like with Lauren Southern, several years from now, or maybe even just several months from now, she comes out and says MGTOW are just the opposite side of the coin as the feminists, or something of the nature of the men's community is harmful toward men, and we need to do something about it by putting pro-leftist messages out there because the men's community is driving men to the right. It wouldn't surprise me to see that kind of stuff, because she's not even coming out as someone that really wants to advocate on men's behalf. And one of the main criticisms I had with Lauren in the 3-part video breakdown that I had with her commentary with Zers was her starting point is just completely disingenuous, right? The idea that men and women both have their issues and we need to work on our issues together. No, we have a gynocentric culture that basically exists based on exploiting men and based on treating men pretty much like second-class citizens at this point that don't deserve things like due process and free speech. That's not the starting point. And it wouldn't surprise me if June has a similar starting point because, again, on the interview that she did, she tried to make claims like, oh, I'm not for tearing women down and we need to care about women too. And I've spoken about that at length. Women's issues at this point, any legitimate issues that they may have left, are women's issues because the pendulum has swung so far in their favor that there's no reason for us as men to really give a damn. That's just where it stands as far as I'm concerned at least, which doesn't necessarily mean anything, but I think a lot of other guys feel this way as well. A lot of other guys that have figured out where things actually stand between men and women realize that that's not a valid starting point. And you do have women out there that will say, men just need to consider MGTOW. Men just need to realize that this society is built to exploit them. There are some women that will go that far with it and have said that consistently enough over the years that I think that they understand partially why that is. I think that they actually do to some degree get it. I'm not saying that all these women are chameleons because I don't think that's necessarily the case, but June, even though she's made anti-feminist content, I don't consider her to be part of the men's community. And that's really important. If a woman's not really making content to try to reach out to and give men good information consistently and saying, hey, men, the deck is stacked against you. Women have the upper hand on many different things now. Do not get a woman pregnant. Do not marry a woman unless you feel like that's absolutely what you need to do to fulfill your life. And if you can do anything else, you should probably consider not getting married, right? So many of these women are not coming out and saying things like that because they truly do want men to just remain on the so-called plantation. I know that analogy is overused, but it's true that a lot of these women don't really want to do things like get rid of no-fault divorce. They're not willing to do things like reform the domestic violence laws in the family courts, to actually expect women to do something again in terms of gender roles if men are going to continue to be measured by how much money they make and how masculine and alpha they are. That's the thing about this is, where are the women that are actually talking about what needs to be done to help men truly, rather than just saying, oh, boo-hoo, men have problems? That's the issue, is that the specifics are left out on purpose. Because what you would have to do to fix things between men and women, the vast majority of women are not willing to do. And again, I've talked about how we basically have a stalemate in this gender war where women are not willing to be reasonable, and men are not willing to basically work for nothing, right? They're not willing to be part of situations that they don't benefit from once they figure out that they have no interest in that. Once they figure out that they're better off not seeking out a traditional or conventional path, trying to build a life with a woman that can just yank the rug out from under him anytime she wants to. So that's why I think it was important to talk about this kind of in my own words. Or at least to me, I wanted to talk about this because it's not a matter of being a chameleon or not so much to me. It's not a matter of trying to figure out whether this woman is being disingenuous or whether she's actually speaking from the heart, so to speak. It's not a matter of, well, this woman is just a liar or this other woman is someone that I actually think has it right. It doesn't matter that much. What matters is taking it all with a grain of salt, realizing that most of these women don't really care about men. Very few of them care about men at all. And the ones that do care about the men in their own lives, but they're not going to care about you. And Stardust has already made a video on that that's better than anything I think I could produce on that subject. But the point that I want to make is, don't be surprised if this is leftist Lauren Southern here in a few years. Of, oh, these men are toxic, and oh, you've got these MGTOW that are just the opposite side of the coin as the feminists, and oh, these men don't care about women, and they just want to reestablish an actual patriarchy, and they're toxic, and all that type of stuff. Don't be surprised if June comes out with that sort of message in the near future, because maybe she's smarter than Lauren. At this point, maybe I should give her a little bit more credit, because I think that she is at least intellectually interested in men's issues, where Lauren Southern kind of just spouted out anti-feminist talking points a lot of the time, and then basically came out later and trashed men and trashed the men's community. Maybe June won't do that. Maybe June has more perception and intelligence than Lauren does, or maybe she will. But it wouldn't surprise me, right? That's the point. I take it with a grain of salt. I take it in stride. I don't take it too seriously, because indeed women are really not the best ones to talk about these issues. And I have mixed feelings on that. Just as sort of a concluding statement to make, I have mixed feelings over women coming into the men's community and being the primary voices. I really don't think it should be that way. But if more men can wake up because they hear messages like this, then I think that can be a good thing. Back in the day, the first content creator that I really listened to extensively, besides TFM and Dark Knight, was Karen Strawn. And without her videos, I don't know that I would have basically digested the red pill quite as well, right? Without sort of her intellectual breakdowns of where things are between men and women, back when she was in her kitchen with the dishes in the background, I don't know that I would have figured out as much as I did in that period of time, from 2014 through about 2016 or so. So I think there's a positive role that women can still play, but as the message gets watered down and corrupted, that sort of benefit is going to lose its utility. And the only way that it really works is if there are men that also are making content that can be found, right? Someone like myself who went from Karen Strawn to TFM to Stardust to Barbarossa, other content creators back in the day. John the Other was another one that I listened to at that time quite often. But I wouldn't have found those people probably as easily if I hadn't found Karen Strawn's content first. So I know it can work out with that sort of favorable result. But as the message gets more corrupted potentially and watered down and just turned into this anti-feminist meme or, oh, men are lonely, we need to help men, sort of lack of in-depth analysis, then honestly, I don't know beyond a certain point how much that's going to help. To be fair, this conversation has gone on for quite some time with some of the more simplistic content creators who are men within the men's community as well. And I don't want to get into any of the drama, the sort of infighting, but there have been many content creators who have kind of a more simplistic, short form video type of way of doing things. I don't have a problem with that. I really don't. If, again, it leads men into listening to more of the in-depth stuff. But with women now being the primary voices in the community in many ways, I think in the long run that's going to probably be a bad thing. Or maybe more men who are in the process of becoming red-pilled, so to speak, will search for that and find content creators like I did, like Stardust, who's still around, someone like Better Bachelor, someone who breaks things down in a more in-depth and I think insightful way overall, because some of these female content creators led them to those videos. And so, I don't know. I have mixed views, and I'm not really decided on whether there's more of a positive or negative effect. I have a concern that in the long run it's going to be negative, though. Let me know what you guys think. But again, guys, take it with a grain of salt. Realize that a lot of these women that come in and make anti-feminist content are not really allies to the men's movement at all. They are not really encouraging men to seek their own path in life at all. They're basically just doing it either for money or attention, or even if they sort of care from their point of view, if they don't really understand it and they're not really that intellectually curious about it, they're going to see the men's community as just hostile. They're going to come out and say, oh, these men are toxic and they're just like the feminists. Don't be surprised if June does that. maybe she's perceptive enough to realize that that's not the case, that the men's community is actually a very good resource for men overall. But I don't have my hopes up, right? I keep my expectations low, and if she comes out later on and says, oh, the MGTOW or the men's community in general are just like the feminists, and that wouldn't surprise me a bit, guys. She's not a traditional conservative, but at the same time, you've seen this happen before with Lauren Southern. You've seen this happen with other women that say, you know, I'm anti-feminist, but the men's community is toxic and all this, because they're not really on our side. They're not really trying to help men. They're just primarily concerned about their own content. And I'm just going to leave it there. I don't know how this will work out with Shoe0nHead, whether she'll continue to cover these topics on men's issues or not, or whether she'll just go back to basically criticizing feminism in itself all the time. But again, the exceptions to what I'm talking about here will prove themselves. And so will the ones that are actually chameleons, or the ones that don't genuinely want to help men, or the ones that don't really know what the hell they're talking about. And I don't know what side of that Shoe0nHead's going to fall on, but at the same time, don't be surprised if she ends up attacking the men's community more directly in the future. Don't be surprised if she pretty much declares war on what we would call red pill content creators or those that share good information. Don't be surprised if it works out that way, right? Keep your expectations low. My sort of take on it is to basically just take it all with a grain of salt and not expect too much out of these female content creators in the long run, and realize that yes, indeed, those that make the best content on the subject matters we discuss here will continue to largely be men in the vast majority of cases.